Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. Today is the third day of December 2023. This is being live on Facebook and YouTube and also on um, the other channel I have here. Um, just wanted to read from chapter 2 of the book called The Temple and Man by Rene Schwaller de Lebicz. I hope I said that correct. So we're going to be reading this particular book tonight. Chapter 2 is called Significance of the Crown of the Skull. Um, so we're going to be reading from this particular chapter. Uh, this is, this author and another particular author I've been reading from the last 2 weeks or so has been basically a suggestion by Phil Langdon to read. This is what I would call more what I would call the areas of physics. People who like to dig into what I call construction type of thinking, which is what this book is about. When he goes to the pyramids, him and his wife for 15 years, he took this quite seriously. He looked at it completely different than the rest of the people who went there. And it's significant because basically, I think he's correct. I think he makes a lot of sense. So we're going to be reading this chapter 2, and I'll be showing some pictures also of the crown of your skull that they have also shared in here. It's not that super long of a chapter. We'll see how that works out. And see if we can get to the right place so I can have it marked here. I thought I had it just a second ago, but I didn't. Bear with me just a second. That's chapter 1. And here's chapter 2, Significance of the Crown of the Skull. And let's turn this down a little bit better. Okay, chapter 2, Significance of the Crown of the Skull. It is necessary to note that the Egyptian figuration carefully marked with a headband, that is what they wore, their crown, their diadem or joint, a divided line for the top of their skull, thus separating the crown of the skull. That is, in Egypt, the height of the body was measured exclusively of the crown, you see. This affected the comparably study of the golden section of the body among the ancient Egyptians as opposed to the Greek proportions. If we examine the nature of this detached part of the brain, we shall better understand the significance of the emphasis placed on it. That is placed on the crown. Whether it be removed or insinuated in the way one of the characteristics differential Egyptians from Greek thought will become clear. The head stands for the covered temple. See, this is I talked about this last night. This is your temple up here. That's why even people call it your temple. You've heard that before. The sanctuary of the human body where all the control centers are gathered. It has the same symbolic meaning in the temple. The physiological, organic study of the head is very complex, and here I shall note the points that concern us most directly. Among the organs of encephalophan, the following must be distinguished. Number 1, the medulla oblongata and the pons, P-O-N-S, the terminal point of the top of the vertebrate column. The cerebellum, the center for the coordination of stimuli coming from the perpetual or cerebrum, and the regulator of the motions required for standing or moving. That is your equilibrium. The cerebrum with its 2 hemispheres, the control center for activity and descriptions of impressions. Number 4, the complex of the hypophysical and pineal glands, forming the true holy of holies, since all the faculties, I should say, of intelligence depend on these especially. From the medulla oblongata and the pons stem 12 pairs of cranium nerves. That's speaking of, in scripture, they speak of the disciples, or also the 12 signs of the zodiac, which the zodiac would refer to air, which your head is going to be more in the air because it's the highest point of your body. Your feet are on the ground, you see. That except for two of them regulate the entire life of the head. These two are pneumogastatory nerves, which innervate and connect the head with all the vegetable functions of the body, and the spinal nerves, which connect the head and the neck. The two hemispheres of the cerebrum are made up of the outer layer, that is the cortex or mantle, composed of gray matter, I should say, and a white mass underlying the nerve fibers. From the cortex with the two lobes of cerebrum stem all the orders for every action of the body. It is from the frontal ascension convolution, that is, along the rhodophysial visual, FISSURE, as well as from its extensions of the intersurface of the cerebrum, the panocentric lobule, LOBULE, that all the motor impulses stem. Here is located what is medically called inverted man, because all the controls of the body stem from top to bottom, but inversely, that is, the highest point of the Rhodophysial visual controls the feet, whereas the controls for the head are located at the bottom of the fissure. Let us also note that this double part of the cerebrum here, is precisely that part which regulates the life of relation, determining what I call the center of cerebrum intelligence, that which requires comparison as opposed to the intellect. St. Thomas Aquinas, or the intelligence of the heart, or the ancient Egyptians, which gives the idea. He's also got some footnotes, and I think they're pretty impressive here. We'll just speak of it real quick here. Number one, it says the ancients put more value on the vital function than on the organ of perception. Currently, we would say to lend an ear, quote. The ancients had an accurate knowledge of the centers of life and intelligence, and knew everything about the brain, which contradicts the statements of Professor Hermann Grelpau in this particular book. See chapter 6, page 105, note 10. Let's get back to what we're reading here. So we're going back to the intelligence of the heart, ancient Egyptians, which gives the direct concept without the necessity for a comparison through a opposition. Let us also note that the two hemispherical lobes of the cerebrum are separated by lamina, Lamina, a extension of the dural matter, mater, which ossifies with age and is shaped like a fax or sickle, sickle. This laminal acts as a separator, that is, not only in fact but also symbolically, by dividing into two halves that cortical part of the cerebrum in which ideas and the faculty of reasoning intelligence are inscribed. It is not simply a question of separating a single organ into two parts, but separating a function into two aspects, that is, psychological consciousness and cerebral intelligence. Every notion is the consciousness of a definition through the opposition of two possibilities, one affirmative, the other being negative. The fact observed is the positive pole, and its negative makes it comprehensible. By means of this organ, we can only understand through successive elimination and final selective choice, which for man is the only possibility of increasing knowledge. So I'm going to show you this picture here from this book. Let's see if we can get a little bit more light on this situation here. So this is it right here. And I'm trying to get as close as I can. There are what they call dotted lines there. Thus, symbolically, this Fouts, that is FALX, separates truth from error, that is good from evil. And because of this dualization, the two lobes of the brain become the center of positive and negative inscriptions, which makes of the brain the instrument for the transcription of the direct, unique intelligence of a adamic, is Adamin, ADAMIC, man. The description of this description of this direct and unique intelligence escapes us, as does any idea of unity, which reasons nonetheless imposes on us in other ways. If the figuration of man, we symbolically separate the crown of the skull, it leaves us only the divine man, that is adamant man, that is Katman, Kadman, the prenatural Adam of the Kabbalah, before his fall into nature. For after the fall, he finds himself in constant opposition. Adam, that is male, and Eve being female, quote, and must therefore be born and die. He can no longer understand anything by merging with the creative unity. He can only understand through comparison of opposites, which is psychological consciousness. So this, what we call the fall here, is basically where he comes from. He is spirit. We're all spirits. We're not our bodies. We're using our bodies here as to function and be able to rise again. You see, we fell because we came from the fourth dimension. We are in the third dimension. This is why most people are perplexed. They don't understand why there is so much bad things that occur here, negative things that occur here. People are hurt. People are killed. Which is this particular planet, as far as I know, what Phil has shared with me. This is the lowest planet, 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 in the universe, as far as we know, is what I understand when Phil shares this with me. So this is why most people don't understand anything what's going on. They're lost, which we all are lost in many ways. We are. Until we come to that recognition, we're really not going to see much or understand much. And what he's talking about here simply is he's trying to find himself. He's trying to figure out who he is, why he's here. Well, most people are not doing that, and that's the problem. They bought into what I would call what goes on here, and in reality, simply, people are just trying to survive. People are trying to survive on this planet. They're just trying to, quote unquote, what's the word? Put food on the table, have a place to stay, that type of thing. And you can understand, it's a different world. Although we have far more comforts than we had even 100 years ago, in a lot of ways. But not all people have that, though. Not all people, that is, worldwide. It's somewhat the West has been far advantageous to that. In other words, we have a lot more opportunities for free time to use that time. Depends on how we use it, though, which is critical. In the Greek mode, it is natural man here below, who is represented. Thus, he must include the crown of the skull as shown by the measurements of the golden sector. In their temples, the ancient Egyptians speak only of the principles of the world and of the cosmic man within terrestrial man, this is microcosm. Thus, in detaching the crown, when the intention so requires, they separate the organ, which is the symbol of the fall from divine, direct intelligence into transitorial nature. And this double brain, right and left, becomes the principles of sexualization and of the intelligence of the created world. And this is one of the aspects that particularly interests me in the symbolism of the Temple of Lazor. And remember, this is where he went. He checked the measurements out, spent, like I said, 15 years exploring all this. To complement this explanation, I shall provide here the outcome of experiments that is cited by E. Gley, Gley, in the effects of extirpation or destruction of the brain, and particularly the cerebral hemisphere, which was based in a book, not a book, but a journal called Physiology, Volume 2, page 945. And this is the quote from that section, as far as I can tell. In the case of the dog, extirpation of the cerebral hemisphere was carried out successfully by Glotz, Goltz, in 1889 to 1891, who even succeeded in keeping an animal alive for 18 months, and also by Rothman of Berlin, who kept one alive for over 3 years, from 1909 to 1912. Goat's dog without a brain had lost all spontaneity and was insensitive to all psychic stimuli, calls, petting, the sight of a cat, etc. Nevertheless, it would walk, albeit clumsily, though, when it was pushed. When pinched, it would start to growl or bark or try to bite. It could hear loud noises. Its pupils, that is, its eyes, contracted in delight, but its gaze always remained fixed, as though lost. Placed on an inclined plane, it managed to hold itself so as not to slide. It ate with difficulty, and moreover, it did not go after its food, and left on its own, it would have died. Rothman's dog was deaf and blind. It also lacked what they call the sense of smell, whence the abolition of what we call of all sexual life. It could maintain its equilibrium and walk. It paid no attention either to other dogs or to people. It experienced hunger and satiety. In summary, the decerebralized animals retain, besides the organic functions, the functions of the coordination of movements and equilibrium. They also retain emotional expression, otherwise they behave as automatics. What is removed with the outer layer of the cerebrum is the organ of the higher psyche functions of memory, of the association of perceptions and ideas, of reflections on sensualities and representation. In short, the organ of intelligence, or rather of the intelligence, that is, synthesis of various psychic processes and adaptations of these to the manifold conditions of life. These experiments show that the removal of this part of the brain leaves man alive, but without discernment, hence with no personal judgment, not able to discern what is right, what is wrong somewhat, you see. Thus, this part of the organs of the endocephalon plays a very important role in the evolution of consciousness. The two hemispheric lobes of the brain are the instruments of memory and decision, hence choice. Thus, that is, the divine, quote, man, without this part of the brain represents the principle of what we call or neter. Neter is from the Egyptian word, N-E-T-E-R, capable of living and acting, but only as the executant of an impulse, that is, he receives. Hence, he plays the role of an intermediate idiocy between the abstract impulse outside of nature and its execution in nature without actual choice, you see. In this regard, this entity has a primal and pre-nature character. So what it means simply is that he's not able to make judgments, not make decisions, so to speak. It almost has to be pushed in a certain situation. As he said, that simply the dog would bark, you see, if it was somewhat threatened. But it was didn't respond to stimuli from either from other dogs or cats or whatever, or to human beings, or when they got when you pet an animal, so to speak. In other words, it was being able to understand what love was about, feeling, so to speak, emotions. On the other hand, natural man uses his cerebral instrument as a means of suffers of nature. That is, suffrage is to be interpreted as a deep experience through the conflict of consciousness and not as pain. He will use it as a tool of his knowledge and his freely determined actions. These actions which will thus be in agreement or at variance with natural harmony. When throughout his experience he has developed his consciousness to the utmost perfection, he will no longer need his celibate instrument to attain it. He will need his etc., but instruments solely in order to act in this incarnation. The life of this Superman, that is Superman, in pure contemplation and ecstasy, will again be that of a divine man, but in consciousness, that is to say, no longer as a blind neter, N-E-T-E-R, but as a being carrying within itself all knowledge, the sum of all possible experience. Thus, man without this crown of the skull represents the preternatural animate man as well as man having surpassed nature. He goes on and says something here. The explaining it says the crown of the skull containing the physical organ of the brain should not be confused with the corneal circle that surrounds this brain case. I cannot treat this circle here since it corresponds to conduits of energy flux that belongs to a subtle state of the human body. On the other hand, I cannot remain entirely silent on it also, the subject, since without such knowledge of it, the symbols which is in Egypt are connected with it. For instance, the royal diadem would be wrongly interpreted. This diadem symbolizes the crowning of wisdom, that is to say, the continual animation of the centers of higher life in the head. Its circuit ends at the center part in the forehead, symbolized in Egypt by the frontal uraeus, U-R-A-E-U-S. When the Egyptians speak of channels in the human body, they are referring not only to physical channels, that is nerves and vessels, but also to circuits of energy. The flax of energy are as much neutral fluxes as magnets of the universe force. They are not necessarily carried by physical vessels. They could, for example, be considered fluxes of induction that emanated from specific centers precisely located according to the definite pathways enveloping what we call physical matter. That's part of his notes. Continue on. It is interesting to find that this organ contained an external boned, B-O-N-Y, framework, like the what we call the carapace, C-A-R-A-P-A-C-E, of an insect. This characteristic, like the sutures of the skull, as S-U-T-U-R-E-S, of the skull, an entire shape thus formed by the crown of the skull, could be compared with the image of the scale beetle. You remember, S-C-A-R-A-B, a theme treated in Egypt, especially under Thonmonius III and Amenhotep III, the builders of the Temple of Lazar. So I'm going to show you something else here. There's a comparison of what we call the skull of man and the skull of the scale beetle. So it's going to be differently, but you can see similarities here. Hope you can see that. The head of man, which serves as the symbolic base of this temple, is depleted without the crown of the skull, as I shall show later, and we shall then see what is the state of the man who corresponds to this incidence. It becomes increasingly apparent in ancient Egypt having a what I call a vitalist mentality in every form of expression, borrows from man, that is the microcosm, his limbs, his gestures, and organs in order to symbolize the esoteric functions of a universal man. It thus fits within the same logic to choose among the animated creatures the most characteristic types to represent these organs and functions. Each vegetable or ancient species represents in this philosophy a stage in the evolution of consciousness, and so to speak, the animated organ type of this plane, not this plane, of this phase of evolution. I was just watching just a few minutes ago before I started this, I watched a little short video. I thought this was interesting because it kind of gives the illustration of something. There's a rabbit who's running down a certain trail. And the rabbit knows that the dog is dependent upon, in other ways, to find that rabbit is by the scent. He's using his nose to basically to pursue this rabbit. This rabbit is very keen and has the knowledge of knowing that. So it basically has him running in one way and then it comes back up that same way, and it hides while the dog comes right by him, doesn't smell him there, and just goes further down the road, the trail. And that rabbit then takes off and goes back where it came from. So the rabbit understood basically that the dog is dependent upon his scent. You see, so this is how animals work, so to speak. Now, human beings don't always work on that situation. It's a little bit different, but this is how the animals were working, and how this particular rabbit was able to escape from being taken or eaten or whatever by this dog. So it had actually come to the senses of knowing how to fool the dog, you see. Next section is called the Summary of Principles. We might show another thing here. Hold on a second. The motivation behind the emphasis that is on the crown of the skull can be summarized thus: man's corporate life is not an end in itself, but a state of transition and a means. This is what distinguishes a spiritualistic form from a materialistic concept of existence. In spiritual philosophy, there exists a permanent element that takes on a corporate form, that is momentarily. That is, the purpose of this existence is to evolve consciously. That's your purpose here, folks. That's what you're here. Everything's based upon consciousness, to understand, to grasp, to be like this rabbit is discerning. In other words, he knows the weakness of the dog. The organic instrument through which we assume consciousness in corporate existence plays a dominant role. This instrument is twofold. That is, one part is organism of the ultimate sublimination of what we call organic elaborations, in order to disengage from it the nervous flux, the energy or spirit, the driving power behind vital reaction. This is the laboratory of the entire psycho-spiritual life, and only the knowledge of this life can teach the human being the means of surpassing his condition as a mortal creature. The other part of the instrument is the dualized brain, which through the senses, that is, permits a contact, that is the intelligence, between the psycho-spiritual being and the natural environment. This celibate intelligence, however great it is, its relative importance is but a transcendental means, since only the consciousness registered in the permanent element subsists after corporate death. And that consciousness is registered in the permanent by means of the cerebral intellect only through suffering. The crown of the skull as the symbol of cerebral intelligence, that is a symbolism so characteristically of pharaonic Egypt, thus represents a unique means for expressing these abstract and complex functions. And that's the end of chapter 2. And I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to do another video on chapter 3 of this, which will be up in a few minutes. So thank you for being here. Again, this is a book by Rene Schwaller de Lebicz. He was French. Him and his wife were involved in this whole deal. What he did, spent 15 years of his life. That's quite a bit of part of a life, folks. 15 years in Egypt at this temple. So this is the conclusion of this particular recording, and then what we'll do is come back and we'll do this next chapter, which will be chapter 3. Thank you for being here, and I'll shortly come right back to this. Okay, thank you.